welcome to tonight's HRI talk. My name is Garvia Bailey, and I am going to be your moderator for tonight's talk. Thank you for joining us for our topic today on youth mental health, challenges and hope for the future. For the first time, we'll be offering a two-part webinar series that brings together leading experts to discuss the state of youth mental health and substance use health. Tonight is the first of those sessions focusing on key challenges and laying the groundwork for our second session, and that happens in May. And that's where we'll dive into emerging treatments, prevention strategies, and innovative programs designed to support youth and young adult mental health and substance use health. We have approximately 243 registrants joining us today with broad representation from all across Canada. We're also, I think it's actually every province in Canada, which is incredible. We're also thrilled to have a few international registrants join us today. So welcome to everyone. Now, HRI talks are about presenting new ideas, discoveries, and studies that are helping to transform the mental health and substance use health landscape in Canada and beyond. HRI works with leading scientists, clinicians, and people with lived experience from across Canada and beyond to deliver these talks. We'll have a moderated conversation tonight with expert panelists for approximately 20 minutes. So this is how it's going to work. After that, we'll take questions from you. And this part is so important. We want to hear from you, the audience. I'd like to share that the offices of HRI are located on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, the Attawaddaron, the Haudenosaunee, and Métis peoples, and the treaty lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit. I'm in Toronto, which is Treaty 13, and Williams Treaty Land. I invite you to think about decolonizing your own mindset as we think about healthcare and how to care for each other. HRI supports the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada's calls to action, continually working to be more inclusive in research and everyday practices. HRI is looking to promote reconciliation and healing and invites input on how to do better moving forward. Now, this is not possible without sponsorship, and HRI would like to extend deepest gratitude to the sponsors who make the talk possible. In particular, our lead sponsor, CIBC. HRI talks would not be possible without the generous support of all our sponsors. Now, I'd like to introduce our expert panel. Senator Stan Kutcher is a Canadian senator since 2018, also a professor emeritus of psychiatry at Dalhousie University. Dr. Jillian Halladay is a registered nurse, clinical epidemiologist, and assistant professor in the School of Nursing and the Peter Boris Center for Addictions Research at McMaster University. And Denzel Innis is a member of the Peter Boris Center for Addictions Research Young Adults Advisory Board. So what I'd like to do is kind of just set us up for how these things will play out tonight. What we really want to do is cover off a few things. We want to make sure that we look at the latest trends in youth and young adult mental health and substance use health. Also, we're going to talk about trauma, social environment, and access to care, and how that shapes mental health outcomes. And of course, we have to talk on promising strategies for early intervention, youth-informed planning and policy, and community support. Okay, so before we jump in, I know you're waiting. We're going to jump in. But first, I just want to take a minute to talk about what we mean by young adult or transition age youth, because there's no universally agreed upon age range. It's more like about life's big challenges and changes, preparing to leave or leaving the school system, moving into independent housing, entering the workforce or post-secondary education, and shifting from youth-focused health services to adult care. This time can be exciting, but it also brings new challenges, particularly for those navigating mental health and substance use health. So, with all that in mind, I'd love to start this conversation. And Jillian, you're on in the hot seat. I'm going to throw the first questions out to you. Why is youth and young adult mental health a growing concern today? Like, what are the key trends that we are seeing?
Yeah. So happy to start us off. So, over the past 2 decades, we've been seeing really sharp increases in youth mental health problems, mainly related to emotional problems. So, that's things like depression, anxiety, distress, or suicidality. And we're seeing these increases not only in like self-reported symptoms, but also increases in emergency department visits or psychiatric hospitalizations related to emotional problems for young people. And these started prior to the COVID pandemic. So, for example, self-reported psychological distress among grade 7 to 12 students in Ontario doubled between 2012 and 2019. And that's similarly been seen across other high-income countries. So this isn't a new trend since COVID. It's not unique to Canada. And while we've been tracking and noticing these increases, we actually haven't yet figured out what's the main driver of these increases over time. So we tend to have a couple buckets of why we think are like kind of our best guesses for why this might be happening. One bucket is changes in how youth spend their time. So that's things like social media or changes in physical activity, changes in sleep, changes in structured and unstructured leisure time. The next bucket is like shifts in attitudes and perceptions related to mental health. And then the last is that young people are kind of growing up in this increasingly anxiety-producing environment. So we have climate crises, precarious job markets, financial crises, political divisions, wealth inequalities. So there's lots of things that young people today are dealing with as well that might be at play.
Really important observations, but I think there are a couple of things that we have not put into this conversation that we need to. We have seen an increase in distress intolerance, dramatic increases in the inability to deal with the existential stresses of everyday life over the last 2 decades. So studies which have looked at this particular issue have found this everywhere in the Western world. And the challenge that we have with that is that we're not quite sure whether young people are actually different substantively than they were 30 years ago, because their ability to process and identify and classify distress is different. So and I think we need to keep this in mind, so that the same stimulus that would cause a particular kind of distress 20 years ago, that same stimulus experienced by a young person today may cause a lot more distress. So we have to be really careful, because there's a whole type of parenting that has happened in that period of time. There has been a overprotection of young people. In fact, pediatric associations have said, stop overprotecting all these young people. Stop being the snowplow parent. Let them deal. Let them fail. So that there's a whole issue here that we have to keep in mind. And then the other part of this that's really important is that we've had all these stigma programs, anti-stigma programs, but we've not had a corresponding increase in mental health literacy.
Right.
And so what we are seeing is that young people are using the language of pathology to describe normal emotions. So instead of being able to say, I'm despondent, or I'm demoralized, or I'm disgruntled, they use the word depressed. And that has a very strong connotation as a mental health problem when you use the word depressed. But when you use the word disgruntled, it's a very different thing. And many of the studies that are done don't give kids a choice of the different adjectives. And I know Jillian will know more about this than I do, but a lot of this work that's been done on social media, when you're just using emoticons to identify emotional states, you lose the nuances of all these emoticons. Anxiety is not the same as worry, but I bet if you go to a grade 12 classroom today and ask them to tell the difference between worry and anxiety, they'll have a hard time doing it.
Right, right. These are excellent distinctions, and another part of the conversation that I think we will probably get into a little bit deeper, and definitely in our next sessions in May. I want to just throw out this poll question to everyone that's all 200 and plus of you. A poll, can you just bring up the poll? Yeah, thank you so much. So what brings you to this HRI talk on youth mental health and substance use health? So choose one of these. Is it because you saw it discussed in the news? I know someone affected by mental health or addiction. I have experienced issues with mental health and addiction. I'm curious to learn more about the topic, or I work in a related field. So if you could just choose one of those from the question, what brings you to this HRI talk on youth mental health and substance use health? That would be great. And then I will, and panelists, you can vote as well. So when you see it up there, you can go ahead, and then I will, I'll share the results with you. So as we move forward, are the results up already? Is that how quickly it all happens? There it is. So what we see right now is whopping 59% work in a related field and are very, very interested in the topic. Or coming in right behind is, I know someone affected by mental health or addiction. So thank you so much for taking part in the poll. And it's great that we have so many people working in it, because we will be talking about policy. And I think that so many people that are working in the field will want to talk about policy and what's happening. Is that heartening to you, Stan, that there are so many people that are working within the field that will want to see policy change, to see that in our audience today?
I think it's great. And thank you, everyone, for being on this webinar, and thank you for showing your interest in this. Yeah. The importance of policy can't be overstated, but policy is only as good as the evidence it's built on.
Right.
And as in how quickly it responds to the needs of people and communities, people and families and communities, and how effectively it responds to those needs. So one of the things that we have to keep in mind is policy doesn't come out of thin air. And people that are here that are interested in policy, I'm going to encourage all of you that are here to make your interest known, not just to us here on the webinar, but we're going to have an election call very soon. Make your interest known there very, very, very strongly, because policy often is developed in response to public pressure. So public pressure to improve mental health, the mental health state of the population, and to improve the outcomes for mental health care is really important.
Thank you so much for that. That's a great reminder. So how can we, though, differentiate? You spoke about this, about the stressors, typical life stressors and mental health challenges in youth and young adults. So we see this we see that there are stressors. We know that there are. We talked about, the difference between someone saying, oh, I'm depressed, and then feeling actually just a little bit stressed out. So how can we differentiate between typical life stressors and mental health challenges in youth and young adults? Stan, can I start with you on that?
Sure. I think, first of all, I think we have to start from a place that normalizes everyday stress, and not that everyday stress is always bad for you. In fact, we have to reconceptualize our concept of what a stress and a stressor is. And the way that I find it useful to think about is that when I'm feeling the hyperarousal that we call stress, it's a signal to me that something, I have to pay attention to something in my environment because that's where it's coming from. And so that's a signal to me to pay attention and to figure out where is this coming from? And then think through, how do I deal with this thing that I have to pay attention to? And then I need to have the tools to pay attention to that, to deal with it. Very often we have gone right to, let's decrease the stress without the step of what's causing this and this signal is to tell me to do something. Look at, no positive social outcome has ever happened without stress.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Women got the vote, not because men thought it was a good idea. All right. So we have to reconceptualize this framework that when we have a stressor, it's telling us we got to do something. And to do something doesn't mean immediately move to decreasing the stress response. The do something means, what do I have to do?
Is that what you're seeing in your clinical practice as well, Jillian? Like, what are these typical life stressors that are masking perhaps, or there's something else, or they're not something else, or just stressors? What are you seeing in your clinical practice?
Yeah, so I haven't been practicing recently. I practiced a couple of years ago and stopped just near the end of the COVID pandemic, and focused more on the research side of things. But broadly, kind of following up on what Stan has mentioned, I think the important things are to first just notice that there might be a change, or notice that you have a change in kind of your emotions, maybe a change in your thoughts, maybe a change in behaviors, or a change in your physical well-being, and then think about, okay, well, was there a trigger? Is there a trigger that might have prompted these changes? And triggers can be anything, as Stan mentioned. They could be as big as a climate crisis, and they can be as small as a big test at school, or a breakup, or getting an unfollow on Instagram. Like, these are all stressors, and it's just thinking about the changes that you're seeing. Are those kind of changes that you think are kind of in line with the magnitude of the trigger or of the stressor? And like, it's okay to feel stressed or feel whatever emotion you're feeling. And it's just thinking about, is that aligned with the magnitude of whatever that trigger is? And then also thinking about how long it lasts for. So if it's lasting for weeks or months after you had an unfollow, then that's something that we might want to look into, versus if it's just a couple days of being upset about the unfollow. Now, there are some symptoms that come up that are never necessarily a normal reaction to a trigger. So if we're thinking of like psychotic symptoms or suicidal thoughts, those are flags always that we might be looking a little bit more into getting more formal supports or more formal help there. But yeah, so I agree with Stan in terms of the noticing the change, thinking of the trigger, seeing if that kind of maps on, and then also noticing how long it sticks around for. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, please, Denzel.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring up, and I think that maybe that's something that's being missed in this conversation, if it hasn't already been said, is that some people, like young adults, let's say, who live in um, have lived experience with trauma and social environments that are harder than others, let's say, might not realize the stress that they're going under is bad, or is that tipping point for them, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? Like, they might
Yes.
think this is totally normal, so I should be fine. But realistically, this is harder than what other people are going through. So it could be the thing that puts them over the edge and puts them at a place of crisis, and they might not even know that. So I think that this might be something worth noting.
Yes, absolutely. That
And
tipping point. Yeah, go ahead, Jillian,
sorry,
please.
Garvia, can I just add to that, or build on that? And Denzel, correct me if I'm wrong here. It's kind of like it might not just be one trigger. It could be an accumulation of things, and things that might have gone unnoticed. So that last tipping point might be something small, but it's the buildup of a whole bunch of other things that you might not have noticed as well, or things that I guess it's that tricky balance of the messaging of that not all triggers or events or situations are normal things to experience, or things that it's okay to have it's always okay to have a stress response to, but aren't necessarily things that you would be expected to be able to recover from quickly. So just keeping that in mind too. Is that what you were getting at, Denzel?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that that's a really excellent point both of you have made. The presence of chronic, unremitting, and unrelenting stress, which can be often related to population health indicators such as poverty, okay, or racism. Those are issues that you can't run away from, and they should never be confused with the kind of existential stress that a lot of people say, "Oh my gosh, I can't handle this," because that's completely unfair. It doesn't make any sense. So thank you for pointing that out, Denzel, because that kind of long-lasting, persistent, everyday in your face kind of stress, people who are privileged often don't even realize it's happening. And it has profound implications. It is so different to what I was talking about earlier.
Thank you all for that. It's a substantial answer, a great answer to a big question. I'm going to throw a poll up, if I can, right now, real quick, get our audience involved in this conversation. What do you see as the top 3 barriers preventing youth from accessing and engaging in care today? And I'd really like our panelists to also answer this question. What do you see as the top 3 barriers preventing youth from accessing and engaging in care today? The answers we have to choose from: lack of access to developmentally appropriate services, stigma around mental health and substance use health, lack of mental health literacy, complexity of mental health issues, long waiting lists. Okay, so what do you see as the top 3 barriers preventing youth from accessing and engaging in care today? What are these ones? It's pretty even down the board. We have at 76% though, long waiting lists. Absolutely. At 60%, lack of access to developmentally appropriate services, complexity of mental health issues, and then lack of mental health literacy. Really, really excellent. Do those questions surprise you? The answers, are they surprising to our panel at all? Does it all make sense? Not at all. Denzel, you're shaking your head. Not at all.
Not at all.
No.
I mean, all of these interlocking problems within the healthcare system just create this huge monster that it's not surprising to see that that feeling is shared among so many people, for sure. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Look, let me call a spade here. We are in a crisis of family physicians.
Yeah.
We have known for decades that we would be in this situation. Provincial governments, which are responsible for healthcare service delivery, have not addressed that effectively. We are in a crisis, a long-standing crisis for mental health care. Many provinces spend well below the 12% of provincial healthcare budgets of GDP, provincial GDP, that the WHO says is the minimum necessary for healthcare. So one of the big reasons why we don't have access to healthcare is because the people who are responsible for funding the services haven't been funding the services. And that's the truth.
Right.
Okay? So that will change when enough of the public demand that it change.
Again, get to the polls. Can you all tell us a bit about, and I'll start with you, Jillian, about the connection between mental health and substance use health in young people? What are those connections?
Yeah. So co-occurring substance use and mental health concerns are very, very common. So youth with mental health problems tend to use substances at much higher rates than those that don't have mental health problems. And almost all youth who are attending treatment for substance use problems are presenting with co-occurring other mental health concerns as well. So the co-occurrence is really common. And that can happen for a number of different reasons. That could be due to mental health symptoms kind of leading to substance use through things like kind of self-medication or trying to cope with some of those symptoms. It could be the other way around, where the substance use may lead to mental health problems through changes in the brain, especially if starting substances really early. It could be changes in like psychosocial factors like your peer group or your engagement in school that kind of contributes to leading to mental health concerns. And then lastly is that substance use and mental health concerns have a lot of the same risk and protective factors more broadly. Like we've talked about trauma, we've talked about poverty, I guess we haven't talked about family history, but family history and genetics, all of those things are really strong predictors of both substance use and mental health concerns. And then we also have shared protective factors, things like belongingness or community or sense of safety, which we've also kind of brought up indirectly in conversations as well. So co-occurrence is common, and there's many kind of pathways to that co-occurrence. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Denzel, can you speak to that, to those connections and those between mental health and substance use health?
Yeah, I definitely can. In my own experience, sorry, in my own experience, the connection between the two started with, as a social outing thing. I wanted to do it with my friends and I thought it would be fun. And then it just snowballed into, okay, I'm doing it to cope with life stressors. And then my mental health problem presented itself. And then it became a co-occurring incident for me. So it's not the, to hear the data that supports it, it's like, oh, you kind of just, it made sense that it happened, I guess.
Mm-hmm. It's a kind of the self-medication piece of it is exacerbating the mental health problem. You wanted to say something, Stan, as well around
Well,
this question?
I think both Jillian and Denzel have really hit the nail on the head.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things that strikes me in my background in psychopharmacology is that some of the substances that are used actually are used initially for beneficial purposes. So that, and let me take something as simple as nicotine, one of the most addictive drugs that we have. It's an anxiety. It decreases anxiety. It's beautiful at decreasing anxiety. So and I noticed this in the 80s when we had our programs at Sunnybrook, that all sorts of our kids who were admitted to hospital, after 2 or 3 days, they wanted to sign themselves out, and it took me a while to figure out why they were going through withdrawal.
Mm-hmm.
You see, so sometimes the use of substances may start and actually to be therapeutic, but then it gets out of hand. And so that's what makes it even more complex than the nuances and the complexities.
Mm-hmm. I have one more question before we get to the to our audience questions, and I'm going to try to make it tight so that we have more time for audience questions. What needs to happen? This is a big question to say make it tight, but what does need to happen to make our mental health system better equipped to support transitional phases for youth? I know in our background talk, Stan, you had a lot to say about what are the systems that we need to equip to support transitional phases for youth. Can you speak to that?
Sure, and I'll do it briefly. Look, we have built healthcare systems based on the person who is suffering has to come to the person who is the socially sanctioned healer. We have to turn that on its head. Okay? Where are most kids? In school. So if we really want to reach young people, if we really are committed to reaching young people, we will integrate our educational and our healthcare systems. we will train our educators who are spending all that time with young people. For example, an experienced teacher may have seen 10,000 16-year-olds in their lives. The parents will see one or two. They know when something's different. And then we have to be able to help our education system and our healthcare system integrate in the interests and the service of young people. We have had a heck of a time getting those two silos to do that well.
Yeah. And Denzel, you talked a lot about if you're making those changes, that those changes need to be youth informed, youth
Yes.
led. Tell me a little bit more about that. Why you think this is important?
Well, I'll speak from my own experience, obviously, because I was so excited for the opportunity to join the Young Adult Advisory Board, um, just being a part of that planning process. And I think when we give youth the opportunity to say, okay, you have a say in the care that takes care of you, it almost says, I I want to get better because I get a chance to say what needs to happen for me to get better. We put youth at the forefront of their care, and we're saying we're not only going to tell you what to do, we're going to hold your hand and say, you know, what do you need to get better? And that was exactly what happened with me, and that's the reason I'm doing so well, I think, for sure. So
It's that age old thing, nothing for us without us. It works in so many different ways, but especially in this conversation. Um, Jillian, tell us about that, the importance of the integration of community-based programs.
Yeah. So I completely agree with both Stan and Denzel on the prevention, the more youth-driven and youth-designed initiatives, and also kind of the smoother transitions between the pediatric and the adult healthcare system, so there isn't like a sharp cutoff between services where we can, and also smoother connections and integration of broader services, so connections between the school system, community supports, and more formal hospital services. So how can we get all of the different supports? Because not one can do everything. So how can we better kind of connect and leverage all of the supports, but help young people in navigating that? Because it's very complicated, even if you're in the field, to know where to go. So how do we help young people who are struggling kind of navigate that as well and bridge the gaps between services?
Yeah, and bridging those gaps means breaking down the silos, which is something that will be talked about in May as well, and we'll touch on it a bit tonight. I'm going to move to our audience questions and our attendees. Please remember to continue to submit your Q&As. I want to introduce you to Hillary Dort, who is HRI's Manager of Communications. Hillary is going to share the questions. Thank you, Hillary. Over to you.
Thank you, Garvia. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. Please do continue to submit your questions in the Q&A box, but I'm going to start with a few that have already been submitted. So one of our registrants has said, how can digital apps be implemented into early interventions for youth mental health?
You want to speak on to the digital side of things, Stan?
Sure. And I just want to give a shout out to Homewood here for the incredible work that they have been doing on this issue, and for the report that they created, which will hopefully help inform our health policy on mental health apps. It has been a wild west of vendors creating products and then marketing the products and people signing on to the products without any kind of regulatory control, without any kind of standardization, without the kind of careful analysis and study that it takes to actually determine whether something is helpful or maybe even harmful. This is going to get even more challenging as AI has come into the interface now. There is now AI-driven psychotherapy programs. There are AI-driven all sorts of mental health-related products. Again, unregulated, unstandardized, and not well evaluated. So I got to say that regulators, that is usually the role of government, is way behind where the industry has gone. And there is going to be a serious period of catch up so that we can have a way that people who are purchasing these products have some degree of comfort that the product that they're purchasing is going to do what it says it's going to do.
Right. Denzel, have you seen uptake in apps for mental health amongst young people?
Personally, I haven't seen that. I'll be honest, I don't think that as many young people as we believe are using them, but I know that a small portion of them do, and they seem to enjoy them from what I've heard, but I personally have not been using them, so I can't give my personal experience on them exactly.
Mm-hmm. What
Yeah.
is what is the research saying, Jillian, about has there been research done around this, around these apps and their prevalence and their and if they're useful, helpful?
Yeah, so I think Stan has spoken to this a bit in the research coming out of Homewood as
Mm-hmm.
well. There's a lot of apps with not a lot of research on it. And a
Right.
lot of the bigger apps have like some of them do have a good amount of support around it, but some of them don't. And industry and even well-intentioned people that want to put something out there into the world to help, if we don't have that evaluation behind it, then it's hard to know whether, as Stan was mentioning, it's helpful or it's hurtful. And I think that's the same across all sectors, like not just in the digital space, but in like school prevention programs or community programs or even mental health clinical programs. Like if we're not evaluating things, then we don't know what's working and what's not working. So I think that that's something across all of them. I guess that another point just on digital interventions in general, as Denzel mentioned, maybe it's not an app we need to focus on, but maybe it's about just different ads or even Instagram influencers. Like how can we use influencers to get messaging out into the world, and does that help? And are there ways to engage youth where they already are at without having to download a separate app? But again, making sure that we build some form of evaluation to see what's working and what's not working in that space.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
So our next question is actually around COVID, and this person is asking if there's statistics from before COVID, especially around major depressive disorder, bipolar, and general anxiety disorder. So just if we're able at this point to compare the before and after in terms of numbers, prevalence.
No, Stan had pulled together a beautiful Excel spreadsheet beforehand. I'll just make one quick comment and then hand it off to you, Stan, because you had pulled together all of these stats. I think we're probably going to get better answers this year and the coming years now that we have kind of a 2-year post lockdown or post kind of acute COVID, so we can have some of the before, the during, and the since data. A lot of the data that's come out, except for some that Stan has, but a lot of the data is more like mid-COVID or just after restrictions were released, so it's harder to know the longer term impacts. But I'll pass it over to Stan.
Well, that's a really, thanks, Jillian. That is such an important question. It's a very difficult question to answer well, and Jillian is spot on, because it depends on how long the runway is you measured before the event, and then how long the runway after the event. We do know that the information that we do know on mental disorders, because that's what you were referring to in the question, is that as far as we can tell now, that those disorders didn't increase significantly. But what did increase was eating disorders. There was a big increase, a big spike in eating disorders. It had been going up before COVID, but there was a very big spike during COVID, and we're going to see whether that continues or comes down. The other thing that we know is that suicide rates went down significantly. So suicide rates during COVID went down dramatically, about 18 to 20%. But what those data don't tell us is whether there are subpopulations in which the data is different. So Jillian is completely right. We have to wait for a bit longer time. Plus, we have to have an enriched database that tells us and allows us to look at specific subpopulations, because what we do know from what happened with COVID is that not every population had the same experience.
Great. Sorry,
Okay.
can I add one
Yes.
more comment? Just based
Please,
on our
Jillian.
pre-conversation that we had on this as well, I think it would also, kind of going back to the initial conversation around a mental health disorder versus general stress, it would make sense if people had more stress during COVID than before COVID. Like that totally makes sense. If you're not able to go to school, can't see your friends, maybe can't even see your family, can't participate in the sports or the activities that you wanted to participate in, you've lost out on some big milestones, like that makes sense to be more stressed or to experience a variety of emotions around that. That doesn't necessarily equate to a mental health disorder, but still more stress. That makes sense.
So our next question is, okay, so this person is explaining, I work in education and now navigating to transition into child and youth mental health. As having experience with myself, my own children, and my students, it's very challenging to advocate for their mental health. And the majority of the time, the advocacy is gone unheard and dismissed. How can we, as a system, work together so youth are heard and understood as they perceive for their own mental health in order to move forward?
Hillary, can I get you to read the last part of the question again? Because I think it was very poignant.
Yeah, so how can we work together as a system? How can we bring the youth in, but how can we also have that connection between the education system and the child and youth mental health system?
It's a great question. Denzel, do you want to start with that? Or do you want
That's a good. I'd like to hear what the senator and Jillian have to say, if that's okay, just because I'm
Yes.
still formulating just
Yes.
how exactly that would work.
Well, we did talk about in our earlier conversations before this, as we prepped for this, we talked about those two speaking to each other, the silos that need to
Yeah.
be taken down. So, Stan, I'm going to throw that question to you right now.
Sure, that's an incredibly simple and yet incredibly complicated question all at once. It'll take us 24 hours to even digest it. But let me just say that there are three things that I just really very quickly want to identify. Number one is the mental health literacy and the mental health of the teacher themselves. That is so important. There actually is an outstanding program co-certified by University of British Columbia, Western University, and St. Francis Xavier University. It's online, teachmentalhealth.org. It's an entire program, training program for teachers that can be used in pre-service training or in professional development, which was developed exactly to do what you're asking for. The thing about it that is fascinating is that some provinces have brought it into the schools so that teachers can take the program. Others have not bothered to do so. So again, it comes down to the political will to do something that we know is important. The other thing that I'm going to quickly jump to is that there are models of intervention that bring the systems together. School-based health centers, Help for All just down the hall. They don't discriminate mental health from physical health. If you have an sexually transmitted infection, if you're going for birth control, if you have problems with acne or diabetes, or if you have a depression or anxiety, you can still go to the same place. And the wonderful thing about that, there is reams and reams of data on that. And it's very, very effective, very cost effective. It's the willingness of the systems to choose to do that that is the barrier. It's not that we don't know what to do. It is that we don't do what we know.
Jillian, I know that you had thoughts on this earlier.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the question again, and I'm wondering, I think we've talked a lot about the importance of school systems and mental health care systems working together, and that being really important for both the youth and also the people supporting the youth, that there are programs in place that aren't implemented. And it looks like in the question, it's also, okay, if we know that they're not implemented, how do we get our voices heard to have them implemented? Or how do we have kind of change in the system? How do we have more funding that goes towards mental health? How do we do more measurement? I don't necessarily know that answer. I'm a firm believer that if there is data, the better your data is, that can make a stronger story to people. Like if you have a lot of data telling a very strong story, that's hard to ignore. But also, as Stan had mentioned before, it's voices in the community. And I wonder, I'm sorry, I'm answering the question by asking Stan a question. Stan, I wonder
That's okay.
if you have any tips for myself and for the audience in terms of how do you actually get your voice heard in the government if you already do see this as an issue and you want to move forward, but there are the political barriers? How do you get your voice out there?
It's really fortuitous you asked that point, you raised the point in the form of a question, Jillian. I've been working for years now to try to help scientists and healthcare providers become better advocates. There's a whole corpus of knowledge and of time and of effort that you have to learn how to become a really good advocate. It just doesn't happen out of the blue. So you have to learn how to do that. In fact, Remy Quirion, who is the chief scientist in Quebec, he and I wrote, well, Evidence for Democracy wrote it, but we started it, a how-to pamphlet on how to advocate. So if you go online to Evidence for Democracy, you can get the pamphlet and you can download it and just modify it to your own needs. It is a skill set. It's a skill set. I have more visits from the dairy industry in a month than I get from mental health advocates in a year. Okay? That tells you something.
It does. It does, absolutely. You know, this is interesting. This conversation kind of eases us right into our last poll of the evening, which is, who do you think should, can I get the poll up here? Who do you think should take the lead in improving and advancing youth mental health and substance use care? This is the single choice here: government and policymakers, healthcare providers and researchers, schools and educators, youth, families and communities, private sector and technology companies, and then all of the above. This might be a trick question, the last poll question here. What do you think should take the lead in improving and advancing youth mental health and substance use? Let's see what your answers are. I know Stan's answer. I know Jillian's answer. I know Denzel's answer. And what is the answer of all our participants here? 58% all of the above. It's a complex, no single entity can address the crisis alone, is what we're hearing. And I'm assuming that our panelists would agree with that this is something that needs a full-throated response.
Yeah.
Do you want to speak to that, Jillian? I'll start with you.
Yeah, that I think you already said it in terms of, and what we've talked about today, it's a very complicated issue. It's and it goes from prevention to early intervention to longer term interventions, which are across systems, across communities, require different types of strategies and supports that are intersectoral. So yeah, we need to all work together, but it's figuring out how do we work together in a way that isn't siloed, so we're not doing one thing over here and replicating it over here, or doing something that conflicts with some strategies that one group is doing. So all working together for the same goal.
Yeah, I see you nodding your head in agreement, Denzel. The way that all of these differing organizations and work together What would you like to see? What would you like to see in terms of this concerted effort?
I would like to see a more maybe proactive approach from each side of trying to engage with each other. I don't think anyone's reaching out as much as they could, maybe, or maybe one person is doing more of the heavy lifting, is a better way to put it. Researchers are putting out the data and saying, this is what we're seeing. Obviously, there's trends. We need to answer to this. And I think youth and families are expressing, this is what's affecting us. We need help. But I think that government piece is maybe not doing the best that it could in terms of responding and listening and really doing something about it. So, it's the heavy lifting is being done by two people that need more support, really. That's at least that's what it feels like to me.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I would agree with that, and I would add just a couple of nuances. One is you can't have, like Stephen Leacock's horsemen, everyone riding off in all directions at the same time. So you need leadership and collaboration. So Senator Bury has just this week published a report. I'd encourage people to find it. If you just go on her website on the Senate, Senator Bury, you'll find it. She's attempting to try to do some of this from using the Senate as a place that can bring people together. But I also want to call out each of those groups for what they're not doing. Because there is a huge amount of inertia in each one of those groups. It's really hard to move somebody who's quite comfortable doing what they're doing. The second thing is that there is real self-interest. And I have been sat at tables where I've been talking to people and say, well, look, we need to fund this. So we're going to take 10% from each of you. Don't you touch my money. Right? So those are, we don't talk about that because it's not polite or whatever the reason, but there is inertia in the whole system and there is self-interest that sometimes supersedes the need to make change. So let's look at ourselves first. Let's see are we doing what we need to do to make this a better system? And then let's look for leadership.
Right. Thank you all for that answer. We are just about out of time, if you can believe it. So if we did not get to your question this time around, or your comment, and you have something that you want to share, the email address that you can send that to is hriresearch.com. I strongly encourage you to do that. Like you said, there is another section in May. We have posted a link to a brief survey in the chat where you can offer feedback on how today's session went. You will also find the survey launched on Zoom immediately following the event. So thank you for participating in that. We do have time for one more question from the audience.
Great.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Okay, so this person, this question comes from someone who works in the mental health field, and they're saying most of their youth clients are using cannabis daily and these youth don't see it as a problem or having a negative impact on them emotionally, physically, etc., even when psychoeducation is provided. Legalization has probably contributed to the impression that it's harmless, along with a lack of research and standardized use guidelines. Do you have any recommendations?
Yeah, I think what this person is seeing is seen in a lot of spaces. Cannabis use is very high among youth and mental health programs, and the highest reason, like cannabis is the most common reason young people come to substance use treatment as well. And it is tricky because of legalization and perceptions. It's also tricky because, as Stan mentioned, initial use might actually help some of their symptoms, like they thought in the early days, and it's more of that kind of vicious cycle that leads to those bigger problems. Another thing that makes cannabis trickier than other substances like alcohol is you don't necessarily have that big hangover or immediate physical consequences of the use. The consequences are far more nuanced and a bit more long-term and harder to make connections. So it does pose some tricky problems for healthcare providers to try to overcome. I think the key thing is coming into those conversations non-judgmentally, with curiosity, really using more motivational interviewing approaches, almost like planting the seed, talking about pros and cons of use multiple times, perhaps, acknowledging that there are pros, maybe leaning into some of those cons and thinking for strategies of like, what are those triggers that lead to more use, and are there different strategies to use instead of cannabis? But I think probably it's the planting the seed and using that non-judgmental motivational interviewing approach repeatedly with your work. Yeah.
Anyone else want to weigh in on the cannabis question?
If it's okay, I'll just jump in. From
Yes,
personal
please, Denzel.
experience, it took a while for me to realize that my own use was negatively affecting my life outside of just my personal life. So, and it took some serious reflection after realizing that to say, okay, is it worth the momentary high or the momentary feeling good if it's at the cost of all of this other stuff, in terms of like professional and personal relationships. Um, and I hope that for other people, it doesn't get to that point. Uh, and maybe that is another way we could approach that conversation with these young people, is saying, just think about what you're giving up in terms of those. Sorry, I'm struggling with words right now. But just why are you constantly going to this usage? And what are you maybe hiding from? Because that's what it was for me. I was hiding from something at the time, and that's why I felt like I needed to constantly use. So maybe that is a way we could approach this.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
I
Go
think
ahead, Sam.
that we've been very fortunate to have both Denzel talking to us about the personal and Jillian talking to us about the therapeutic intervention. On a policy level, whatever policy you create for almost anything, there are some people who will benefit from the policy and some will be harmed. So the challenge is to create policies that will be way more good than harm. But then to be able to identify those people who are most likely to be harmed and build protective rails around that so they don't have to get harmed before they get care. And I think that area that we have not thought through well enough, and I wasn't in the Senate when that legislation went through. I was actually a very strong critic of that legislation on the basis of the youth being not guardrailed properly. Whatever, but some of the critics say to me, well, if they weren't using cannabis, maybe they're using cocaine instead, so that'd be more harmful. So that's how complex these discussions become. So we constantly have to try to do the greatest good for the greatest number. That's going back to Jeremy Bentham. But we also have to realize that whatever the policy put into place, there are people that are not going to benefit it, but might be harmed. So how can we think of that beforehand? How can we build into legislation and regulations and education those interventions that actually will protect the people that might be harmed by what we think is right? So it's very complicated.
Well, thank you all so much for engaging in what really are complex and complicated issues. The research that we've gone through, all of it has just been fantastic. Unfortunately, we've reached the end of our time for this evening's talk. As mentioned at the outset, this is the first of a two-part series on youth mental health, and we're only just beginning to explore this important topic. In our next session, we'll dive deeper into emerging treatments, preventative strategies, and innovative programs designed to support youth and young adults in both mental health and substance use health. So be sure to subscribe to HRI Talks so you don't miss it. I want to, of course, thank our panel members, Senator Stan Kutcher, Dr. Jillian Halladay, and Denzel Innis for taking the time to join us tonight and offering such wise words and expertise. If we didn't get to your question this evening, you can reach out to HRI at hriresearch.com. A recording of this HRI talk will be shared with you and posted on YouTube in the coming weeks. We invite you to share it with others. Very important conversation. As a registered charity, donations play a vital role in HRI's research and amplifying the impact. If you'd like to donate, simply go to HRI's website and click the donate button. Thank you so much in advance. Once again, I'd like to thank our lead sponsor, CIBC. We are so grateful to our sponsors and to our supporters across Canada and beyond for making HRI Talks possible. I'd like to thank you, the audience, for joining us and expressing your keen interest in this topic. We will see you next time. Good night.